We'll have that at 4:20. Matt Tait joins us. He, of course, covers college athletics, covers KU, and covers the Big 12 quite a bit. Had an article today, pendulum swings back towards Big 12 in the race to an uncertain future with the Pac-12. Matt, thanks for your time. Did you ever think there was ever any life at all or a dead man walking when it comes to the Pac-12 and Big 12 kind of a merger?
No, I never saw that. I mean, I guess with conference realignment, you never say never. That's one thing we have learned. I mean, obviously there's some desperation in play, and I do think now, probably more than the first couple of rounds, people are trying to think a little bit more creatively and looking at all options and trying to say, well, maybe we could pull this off, or maybe we could try this, or maybe we could do that. I mean, again, I think the desperate nature of some of these conferences and some of these schools kind of leads to that. But I never saw the full merger make sense at all for the Big 12. And I mean, I'm following it the best I can. I'm trying to research it a little bit, but I'm not a TV executive. I don't know the intimate details of all of that. I mean, the best we can do is just kind of, figure out what we can learn about the process and make some educated guesses unless we get good information from good sources. So, that based on all that, I just didn't see the value to go full merger. I think it makes a ton of sense for the Big 12 to want to add a few teams from the Pac-12 because that's twofold, right? It's not only adding value to your conference and adding a little bit of stability and growing it and all of that stuff, but it's also basically a kill shot to the Pac-12, and you're eliminating, one of your direct competitors. So I don't see any reason not to do that, and I think that's where it seems like this is headed.
If Kansas fans had their druthers, I know that a lot of them would say they would be in the Big Ten, but that seems less likely as each realignment domino falls. But from Kansas's perspective, how do fans see this working out for them?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, they had been in the Big Ten, 6 months ago, and 6 months ago I might have told you they had a shot. But now that this thing's gotten crazy and is really rolling again, the more conversations I've had with people out there, the less likely I think it is for Kansas to ever wind up in the Big Ten. I mean, again, never say never. There are a couple of things working in KU's favor that might make them, and I emphasize might make them an attractive option for the Big Ten eventually, someday. But there are some things working against them too, and obviously that's football. I think most people around here think the arrow is pointing in the right direction with football, but there's still work that needs to be done on the stadium. There's still work that needs to be done on the field. And until you can kind of, I guess, buy some time to get those things in a little bit more, consistent and solid shape, it's going to be a hard sell. And, of course, around here, everyone thinks the basketball program can save them. But it just doesn't work that way. I mean, the basketball program's a great brand. It's obviously one of the best of all time, historic, coming off the national title, all that stuff. But we know that football drives this thing when it comes to realignment and revenue. And I think the Kansas perspective is that, hey, look, if we could ever get football going, even just reasonably well, it doesn't have to be a 10-win program every year, but 6-7 wins, competing for bowl spots, things like that. I think that the administration believes that their potential for being one of the top revenue generators in all of college athletics is really, really high because they already compete at a pretty high level with basketball carrying the weight. So there's so much more money to be made with football and more potential there that if they can just get that thing flipped around, I think they really like where they sit. But again, it's a big if. It's been a tough decade in that regard, and they've missed on a bunch of opportunities and haven't been able to get the job done. So even though the arrow's pointed up, I think it's going to be really hard for people to say, hey, let's take Kansas. They're going to get it turned around. I mean, I think people are going to need to see it before they commit to that.
Matt, I know you had an article out a few days ago, but looking back to Big 12 media days, Brett Yormark comes in and he was doing an interview with us, and I mean, Smokey straight up asked him, have you offered, or what I think you said offered, anybody outside as far as expansion goes? And here we learned, yesterday, that there was at least talks ongoing with the Pac-12 merger was the talk, but, ultimately nothing happens there. But he was very clear. I mean, he's open for business, as he said. I enjoyed hearing what he had to say. How about you?
I loved it. I think it's exactly what the conference needs. I think he's aggressive. I think he's, experienced in all the right ways. I think he's inexperienced when it comes to college athletics, but that's something you can learn. And you can use the people around you, which, the Big 12 office has a bunch of veteran type people that he can lean on as he's learning. So I think the entertainment side of him, I think the, thinking outside of the box part of him, I think his aggressive nature, I think all of that stuff's going to be really, really beneficial for the conference. And, I loved how he kept saying, we need to build the Big 12 brand, but he also, every time he said that, he added "and business," because it is a business. And anybody that's trying to pretend it's not anymore is obviously way off the mark. And so for them to have an aggressive leader who's not afraid of any challenges and not afraid of pushing any buttons and going after whatever he thinks is best, that kind of personality combined with a guy who understands that this is a business and needs to be run like a business, I think that can only be good news for the conference in the future. And look, how cool is that, right? That he's talking to Phil Knight, right? Like, the merger's not happening, but that's the man. That is the king of the castle at Nike and the new Big 12 commissioner who hasn't even started yet, having a conversation about the future. I mean, that's, if you're a Big 12 person, fan, coach, administrator, student, whatever it is, if you're a Big 12 person, that's the kind of stuff you want to hear happening. And that's not to say Bowlesby was, in any way bad. I think Bob Bowlesby was consistent, solid, stable. He brought a lot of things that the conference needed at a really critical time, but he never struck me as someone who was going to be that, let's pen our ears back and go get something and go be aggressive. And I think Yormark is that guy. And so I think, the future looks really good with him in charge. There may be some bumps, an aggressive personality like that. It's not always smooth sailing, but you can definitely get the sense that he's gonna be sort of in attack mode. And that's not just saying that with regard to, trying to add schools. I think that's in everything. I think that's in their television contract negotiations. I think that's with new media streaming opportunities, NIL. I just think he's going to be, full force ahead, attacking every challenge that's in front of him. And you got to like that personality and that East Coast persona that's going to be driving the ship on that. I think the Big 12, we'll see. We'll find out. In 5 years, we could be really wrong. But I think at least right now it was exactly the kind of hire they need to make. And now that I've heard from him and got to, be around him a little bit, I get the feeling that he's the perfect guy too, not just the right hire, but the perfect guy.
Yeah, he mentioned that when I asked that question back last week, but also the question was, do you know where the money is? And that seemed like a simple question, but his answer wasn't just yes, I know everything. It was not only that, but the way he answered it by bringing up things like bandwidth and other ways of getting money and revenue, which is not breaking or news or any kind of like new information, but the way he responded to that, to me, was very interesting. And I think that might be as much of a value that he has as anything, that he does know where there are some other revenue streams that perhaps are old or not old school, but new. And I love that part. Matt, I know we got to go. You mentioned one thing in your story, though, where you thought that if things go right and if the Big 12 does stabilize or whatever else with Yormark, that you could even see their annual money going up from what was 42.6 into a pretty high level of what you've seen, or you've seen other reports of 50, 60, 70 million?
Yeah, I don't know that that's obviously, it would probably be incremental is what I understand. They could get to that number type of thing. I don't think that's next year or even 2 or 3 years away, but I think it's exactly what you just talked about, the new revenue streams of different media and new contracts and new partners and things like that. One of the things I read, and I wish I could remember where, I've I've been reading so much lately that it kind of all blends, and I regret that because I should keep it straight. But one of the things that I read recently was that there's speculation out there that the Big 12 at some point, whether that's a couple years from now, 5 years from now, whatever it is, could have contracts with as many as 4 television networks and maybe 3 or 4 streaming services. So to me, that opens up a lot, right? If you're still locked in with Fox and ESPN for any kind of tier 1 deal, you're going to make some money. There's going to be money there. And Yormark's made it clear he's not adding Pac-12 teams if they don't add value. So you got to figure that if that stabilizes and that's where they move, you're going to at least be in that 40 million range with those two, at least, Fox and ESPN, kind of like you've had all along. But if you can open up that tier 2 thing with some streaming networks and beyond ESPN Plus, right? We're talking about Apple TV or Hulu or Paramount or whatever it is. I read somewhere, and I regret not remembering where, but I read somewhere that alone, that tier 2 stuff could be worth $20 million a year for all of the schools, depending on how high the number of the roster goes. So, you add 42 that they've got now to 20 from the streaming new revenue, and all of a sudden you're at 60. And again, that could be 2, 3, 5, 10 years away. But if that's where they're headed, if that's where his vision is taking them, it's not the 100 million plus of the Big Ten and the SEC, but 60 sure sounds like something that a lot of these Big 12 programs could absolutely live with and get by on and feel pretty darn good about, because it's continuing to grow what they've already been used to, and that only opens up more doors, and there's just nothing not to like about that. It's got to happen, and there's a lot of talk and negotiation and handshakes and compromise and all that stuff that has to take place between now and whenever that is. But the idea that that's even possible is showing you what the potential is here and why it may be worth adding a few of those Pac-12 schools if that's something that can happen. So it's fascinating time. It really is.
Matt, thanks for your time, man. We appreciate it. Matt Tait, again, covers Kansas, but also Big 12 and college athletics, the Lawrence Journal World, with us on Sikkim 365 Radio and 365 Sports. Well,